welcome back to the channel. Now, there's various stages of feeling old in racing where you're a fan of the sport. The first stage of starting to feel a little bit old is when drivers come into the sport who are younger than you. The next stage of getting into the sport and starting to feel slightly older is when drivers come into the sport and they win world championships and they're younger than you. The first driver in my case that was the case was Fernando Alonso. So now he's back in the sport, and all the content creators are going about how he shouldn't be here because he's so old. So yeah, thanks for that, guys. Anyway, here to talk with me today about how well we think he'll do this year is someone who is happy to see him back in the sport, so hopefully won't be going on about his advanced age too much during this video. Yeah, so please welcome, thank you to Mike from F1 Fanatics. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing very well, thank you, David. First of all, congratulations on 100 subs. This is what's kind of brought about this chat, hasn't it? So
I'm very happy about that. And there's a lot of help from some of the other content creators to make that happen, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. So I'm very pleased with that.
I think content creators are always happy to kind of help each other out because we realize kind of how difficult this game is. And, the first steps of putting yourself out there in front of people to go, hey, here's my opinion. And I'm actually filming myself on camera and saying, listen to it as well. And to get people and to even have 100 subscribers, on it, I think it's the first real massive milestone for any creator, because I even think just 100 people in a room, that's how many people have subscribed to your channel. It's quite something substantial, especially as both of us, neither of us come from any kind of technical video editing background. It's certainly a learning on the job.
Well, as we've already found out with this one, it's definitely learning on the job. But no, the first video I think it was of yours that I watched was your 100 subs video. Was it Covent Garden, was it? Shouting out,
Yeah.
I'm not just a fan.
Yeah, I think me and Ash went up to London. I think Ash shouted out something like some Sebastian Vettel quote that Mark Webber said or something.
Yeah.
And I think I said something like, Kimmy, like, give me a steering wheel or something like, glove steering wheel. Something like that. But yeah, things have tamed down a little bit.
If you haven't seen that 100 subs video on F1 Fanatics,
we kind of went all in on 100 subs. It was only down on the way from there, really.
I don't know. Should we start talking about the subject in hand?
We probably should.
This is going to be an interesting one. Right, so as we were talking about, you are a Fernando fan. I'm a Michael Schumacher fan, and he was the guy who obviously beat Michael. But first guy younger than me to win a championship, very divisive and interesting character. So, do we start with, what you feel he brings to or can bring to the Renault team this year?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to start, isn't it? Well, the easiest one is he is experienced. He immediately comes in as one of the most experienced heads on the grid. So by that very knowledge, he brings, development knowledge and ideas that, and having worked with that team already, I think some of the senior engineers are still there from his 2005, 2006 championship winning days.
Yeah.
So that's the immediate big positive he brings to the side. He brings a winning mentality, because although he hasn't won in Formula One, even in Grand Prix wise, for a very long time, he's gone off into other categories. Obviously in the World Endurance Championship was very successful. Won Daytona, didn't he?
Yeah.
As well, the 24 hours. Wasn't successful at Indy and wasn't successful at Dakar, but I think he was the highest placed rookie ever at Dakar.
Well, that's sort of the thing is, whereas when Michael Schumacher returned, for example, there's a lot of wasn't the same Michael he was or whatever, but a lot of that was 4 years out where he wasn't really racing. you can't say Fernando's not been racing, because he's been racing the wheels off anything he can actually get a chance to drive. So the
Yeah.
only worry is whether the F1 run for the next couple of years is going to ruin his chances at the Triple Crown, because he won't be able to do Indy, you know.
Well, I think if he's going to do that, he's got to commit to a full season to it. I think Indy is a lot harder now than probably people give it credit for. I don't think you can easily rock up to the Indy 500 nowadays and just expect to win it. Even as good as someone like Fernando is, I think, you know, with the quality of drivers that they have in that series now, and if they're racing the whole season there, it's going to be difficult for someone like Fernando. But yeah, look, Fernando is a little bit. Michael was that relentless competitor, but I think he'd switched off into family mode.
Yeah.
Fernando has a partner, he has a girlfriend, but from the documentary on Amazon Prime that I've seen, she's just as relentless and into it as.
I started watching that, but where some of it's in subtitles, it's very difficult to pay attention to that when you're like cooking dinner and doing washing up. So
Absolutely.
I've got to go back to it, like when I've got a chance to sit down properly.
Yeah, I
yes,
definitely
get that. You definitely get that impression that, you know, he doesn't mess about as Fernando.
No, it is a relentless. If he's coming back, he might have said, I think he was quoted at the Indy 500 that he's just going back to Formula One, you know, to enjoy himself. I think he does feel bad that, you know, McLaren didn't end on the high that he would have liked to, and his reputation wasn't that of what a two-time champion probably should be, leaving the sport.
Yeah, that's what I think part of the problem is, because you have a lot of younger people who perhaps like, you know, why is Fernando this old guy coming back? He's had his time or whatever. But they only some of them only remember him for the McLaren years, where driving around in certainly not one of the better cars, and one that inevitably broke down on him rather a lot. So they're not perhaps seeing, you know, Fernando as we kind of remember him.
Yeah, I think it is so difficult because Formula One, very much so, I would say, is a young man's game. Now, I know Lewis defies the odds, but then Lewis is then maybe the example that someone like Fernando can come back and do really well. Because, you know, if you even put a very talented driver with the experience that now obviously Lewis has at 36, he's going to still do really well against the best guys. But because the sport keeps getting faster and faster, naturally your reactions slow over time. That's just an unfortunate consequence of aging, that it very much makes it a young man's game for it. But you've seen in other series that age isn't really a factor.
Yeah, I used to have a T-shirt that said something like "Youth and talent is no match for old age and treachery," and I think that's kind of, you know, there may be hints of that coming along, depending on how his relationship with Ocon goes along at Renault.
Well, that's probably one of the weirdest. I don't know. You may have heard some other quotes on it. I've never heard a fellow competitor speak badly about Fernando Alonso in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing. In fact, it's much the opposite in terms of he's been one of the most cleanest racers they've ever raced against.
Well, the thing is, I think with it, it's a case of Fernando's savvy enough to know that where the line is, he's aggressive to defend and hold his position, or whatever else, he'll be aggressive to attack. You know, it's like if people need to put two wheels onto the grass going around Curva Grande to get past him, then, you know, that's the line, that's as far as it goes. But he knows that basically he's not going to gain from a race if he DNFs. So, you know, he knows where the line is, he will take them to that line. So, but if he can pull something crafty like jumping two people going into the pits, then, you know, he'll do that.
Absolutely.
It's shrewd and savvy.
No, completely agree with that, and that's only come more and more with experience. And, you know, he'll be one of, he sees any advantage that he can, and also he knows the tracks pretty much like the back of his hand. He knows them inside out. He knows the braking points. He knows, exactly the fastest lines for him to take through it, and how he's going to get the best performance out of the car that he's put into. And that's what I think Renault is getting.
Yeah.
And they had to replace Ricciardo with someone big, because I actually think Ricciardo was a fantastic driver at Red Bull, but I actually think he developed and went up another level. I actually think we see a better Daniel Ricciardo now than we've ever seen in the Red Bull days. And so losing that, especially with how well he did in the 2020 season, they needed someone of the quality like Fernando.
Well, this is the thing. Really, Daniel left perhaps a year sooner than Renault. He left them at a serious disadvantage, and you can understand why initially there was a little bit of needle between him and Cyril about it. Because had he have left a year later, when they could have seen how, Esteban had bedded in or whatever else, where their junior drivers would have some more experience, that would have been an easier sell to the Renault management and stuff. But when Renault management are going to the French government asking for X amount of billion euros to stay in business, turning around and going, well, we're going to go into Formula One. We're going to run with this almost practically unknown lineup that's never even had a podium. That is, you can't really sell that to them. So, experience. They needed someone to Daniel-esque level, if not higher, to, encourage people to spend the money.
Yeah, and realistically, looking back at that time, Fernando was the best on the market that you could have possibly got, in my opinion. They maybe might have gone for some guys like Magnussen or Kvyat had they waited later on in the season. But I still think, if you get a Fernando back, that he does come back to high standards. And I think in his last season, the key thing with McLaren is they didn't part ways because McLaren didn't want him to stay. He left because he didn't want to be in a competitive car. If he's coming back and feels Renault can be a competitive car, then you're probably going to get a very good Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, well, the quote I had when I was looking on the McLaren website about it or what have you was basically that, while he was unable to drive a McLaren Honda that did full service to his considerable talents, his drive and ambition remained undimmed. His races throughout 2016 and 2017 were given the merest sniff of an opportunity were sublime. And that's coming from McLaren after he left them, So.
And I often think as well, which a lot of people forget, that Andre Seidel, who wasn't even at the club, obviously was going through at the team, going through the transition. He said that Alonso and Stoffel were massively, a big help in the success that McLaren saw in 2019. Obviously, a lot of people wanted to spin the idea that because Alonso's toxicity had left, it allowed the team to succeed and go. I don't know. Toxicity is probably the wrong word, but he is a very one-man team. He does mould it around him to go from there, and there isn't much of a team element. I think the only time there's been a team element is probably him and Giancarlo Fisichella back in the day.
I think there was a strong team element at Ferrari with him and Felipe, when Felipe basically understood that he wasn't the driver he used to be and he wasn't going to be able to compete with Fernando.
Yeah.
As soon as that sort of agreement and understanding was reached, they became a good team together.
Yeah,
they had to get it first.
Yeah, which is hard. Well, actually, probably him and Jensen probably got on fairly well, actually, going through there. So I've said that. Yeah. Realistically, if it's a young teammate in Stoffel Van Dorn, he just had the hardest job in the world. Yeah. Going in and being teammates with a Fernando he clearly shows when he gets to a stage and he's frustrated in a team not matching his ambition, he will just relentlessly probably go more selfish, probably is the fair assumption to make. I don't want to kind of say that he's just in it for himself. He obviously wants the best results for the team, but he's going, I want me to.
He's a racing driver. he wants the best results for himself as well, and obviously the
Yeah.
team will gain from him getting the best results that he can get. So benefiting one benefits the other.
Yeah. They were intertwined together, weren't they, on that front? So I think it does speak volumes on how McLaren spoke to him, and the fact that they offered him the ride for Indy when the opportunity came about, and they full well knew that they weren't his first choice. It was because Honda stepped in on, I think, him linking up with Andretti again. But yeah, it was, going back to Aaron McLaren, they jumped at the chance to kind of field his car Indy again. So the fact that they've always maintained that relationship is speaks volume of how highly he was still valued the last time he was in Formula One.
It's that thing with Fernando and a lot of great sports stars or whatever else, if we're realistic about it, where they're so driven and so focused on success, they can be difficult people to like sometimes, but very easy people to respect.
Yeah, I think that massively sums it up perfectly. I always look at Fernando, and what I've always quite liked about him over the year is some drivers I can look at and I go, you've got PR mode on. So you're saying these things because the cameras are on. That's the things that the sponsors want you to say. That's the things that the media want you to say. I always looked at Fernando and go, what you see, what you get. He's very honest. And I think that's refreshing. Obviously, he built himself up to the standard that he could do that. But he expects the highest standards of himself and also those around him. And if he thinks you're not pulling your weight, he seems the type of bloke who'll tell you. And people don't like being told that they're not doing a good job.
Mince his words. The other thing is, because he's like this huge star or whatever else, if he strikes me as a very kind of personal, private kind of person. So being kind of mugged or being, I think if you're a fan at a track and you happen to see him, you're perhaps not catching him at his best. Because I remember being at WEC till 8 o'clock in the evening trying to catch hold of Fernando for an autograph. And literally, he came back down to the back of the Toyota garage area with his trophy, and there were 50 people in this crushed in area waiting for him. And it's just sort of like the look of almost resigned look across his face, There's sort of like, I think literally we were there half a second. I managed to quickly get this squiggle off him but it was sort of like as soon as he could get through the crowd and be gone, he was, because, well, I've been to WEC about 4 years in a row. I've never seen it like that at all for anyone. And there was him and Jensen both there that year, so that was pretty crazy in the paddock area. But yeah, as I said, there were people outside the Toyota motorhome and garage area till 8:30 at night trying to catch hold of him. And just, this is why Formula One does not allow fans like en masse into the paddock area, because the teams and drivers wouldn't be able to breathe with that number of people having access to it. Because at WEC, for example, you might have 50 odd thousand people. At the British Grand Prix, there's 140,000. Can you imagine the teams trying to operate a tool if people actually had access to the paddock?
It is crazy, and it's unfortunately why, although an incredible experience, it's why they kind of price it up as what they do, is because it is that F1 in its way is its biggest asset. The brilliance of it being a World Series and having world champions is also its biggest flaw, because it has so many cultures it has to appease to. It has so many fans, and because then the watching eyes of the world are on them so much, you do get that celebrity fandom. And I completely agree. Actually, I'll probably reference the documentary because I thought it was a really good insight. Obviously, it's going to be Fernando biased because it's about him. So
Amazon do love him because they're the guys who did the McLaren documentary.
Yeah, Grand Prix one as well. They did.
Yeah, I remember watching that one.
Which was very good as well, actually, I thought gave good little insights. So they're always going to put a positive spin on it. But you know, he started off very happy with the at Le Mans doing all the autographs,
Yeah,
sit in the car. But then it gets to a stage, and I can't imagine it getting to that level of fandom where there are just relentless people. Just and you know it probably from seeing Charles Leclerc last year at Autosport. You know,
yeah,
just that kind of split second of seeing him and getting that signature. You know, it means a lot, and I
yeah,
think they do realise that. But at some stage, everybody has their breaking point, and
yeah.
we're not meant for mass stardom. People aren't meant to have that many people interested in them.
People can either sort of deal with it or almost embrace it, or they just want to do the thing they want to do. And
Mm,
that's sort of like an unfortunate side effect of it, almost, I think. And,
yeah,
guys like Fernando and Kimi, Seb to a certain extent, that's just not what they're there for.
no,
So, yeah.
it
And,
it is a difficult one to manage for
yeah,
sure.
but it can make them come across as a bit sort of huffy's not what I mean, but direct, occasionally short or whatever else. I think the problem is if you're a fan and you're meeting them, that's your snapshot into them, and so much of that initial reaction or whatever else, or how they come across to you in that snap second, is how you judge them.
Mm,
There's younger drivers or whatever else who, to this day, if I see them posting anything, I'm always like, oh, liking it or whatever else, because I remember them being good to Ayrton or whatever else. So it affects the way you view them forever after. But
mm,
at the same time, you have to expect and understand it's their sort of privacy as they're trying to get round to do whatever they've done, and maybe they've had a bad race or something else. So you're catching them not at the best opportune times for them either. So it's a very awkward relationship sometimes between fan and star.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine? Right, you've gone to work, you've had a real bad day at work. I don't know, the boss has laid into you or something like that for some reason. You come back, you kind of peed off in terms of that, and then suddenly you've got 50, 60 people who are wanting you to cut you. The thing you want to do is you want to just go and shut yourself off and kind of just privately go, all right, let's just get through today in terms of it. They have to do it. They have to
Yeah,
smile. They have to pretend everything's okay. And at the end of the day, they're all human beings. And yeah, I certainly forgive them for being short at times. It can be, but like you said, it's scary, isn't it? Just those few interactions can base a whole person's opinion on that driver for the future going forward, and it
yeah,
may not have been an accurate representation.
no. So I mean, I was a little bit harsh on Seb Buemi that weekend because we've been waiting around until like 8 o'clock at night or whatever else for people, Fernando, and just generally because you were chatting to other people and whatever else in that area as well. And Sebastian Buemi was like the one Toyota driver we'd not got an autograph from, and I saw him coming along after he'd had to do like drugs test, whatever he had to do at the end of a race.
Yeah,
So not in the best time anyway, but he'd seen a couple of Japanese women there who cheered him on from like following him for forever through the various formulas and stuff. And he'd been chatting to them and saying, "Oh, I'll be out in a minute" and what have you. And then he came out and him and Fernando just shot straight past everyone and ran off and didn't see him again. It was just like, well, that wasn't very good, was it? And then, got back on this minibus and back to the car and got all the way home. And when we got home, we found out the reason why they'd been in such a foul mood and had shot off and ignored everyone was because they'd got disqualified from the race. So when you put it in context, that explains a lot.
it certainly does. Yeah, you're just like, oh, come on, really? But then, yeah, I mean, if I was disqualified from a race, yeah, I'd absolutely be, especially World Endurance Championship as well. I
Mm,
mean, the toll that it takes on those guys. Like, I mean, the hints in the title, endurance.
yeah,
The long stints that they have to drive in those. And well, Silverstone's only 6 hours, isn't it? Uh,
normally, yeah. I mean,
in terms of it, but it's still it still takes it out of you.
even if you've got a three-man team, that's still 2 hours at a time you're spending in the car, and it's not like them LMP ones are exactly soft. They are not much slower than Formula One cars. So Yeah, they will. That you'll still feel the G forces and stuff, and having to be aware as you're trying to lap like GT cars and stuff. You've got to be very aware all the time.
Absolutely.
Weirdly, 2 years out of the first three that we saw WEC at Silverstone, the guy who won it, the team that won it, got disqualified.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm sure it's not just us, but
So basically, David, what you're saying is the drivers are petitioning to ban you from going from the World Endurance Championship because they don't want to be disqualified.
Well, I've come to the conclusion that I just basically should not recommend or say on a predictions video that X, Y, and Z is going to win anything, because my F2 and F3 predictions went a bit wrong as well. So, I'm not saying I'm a Jonah or anything like that, but the year I did decide I was going to support Portsmouth Football Club, they got relegated. I've seen 2 football games, and both times the home team lost 3-1. I am a Ferrari fan.
Ferrari.
Mm. Yeah, let's just change the subject now. That's a good plan.
Oh, brilliant in terms of that. But I guess probably the link into bringing it all back into Fernando Alonso is that he is often this guy who's perceived as cold,
Yeah.
not very friendly, not very welcome. And, I think a lot of younger fans in particular, I don't want to scathe this because there's a lot of fans overall, young and old, that don't particularly warm to Fernando.
Yeah.
In that aspect. But I suppose especially the younger ones like you brought up, who mainly remember him from the McLaren years, the GP2 engine meme as it's become.
Yeah.
And I think some people are upset about him not valuing the points, not necessarily too bothered in his last race.
Yeah.
To type of go from there, which, are all things that I kind of understand. But it is so difficult to kind of judge these guys, and we feel like we know them from watching the TV, but we don't actually know them. That makes sense.
Oh yeah, perfectly. The big interesting one I think is going to be if you've got such a strong personality walking into an Alpine team that have just parted ways with their team boss. That could be an interesting dynamic, I think.
Well, so it's not official, but it's Brivio, isn't it?
Yeah, they're talking about him. Yeah.
Obviously, he's had a lot of success in MotoGP. I don't know MotoGP too well, but Yamaha was one of the teams. Have they been the successful championship-winning teams?
Well, I think that he was a guy running Suzuki, and they've just won the championship. So he's coming from a background of success, but he's walking into an environment he doesn't know with a character like Fernando there, who's going to very much be wanting to stamp his own authority on the team.
It is.
So
I think the positive that Brivio may have over it is Cyril, in terms of team principles, for me, always seemed quite young. And obviously came from his days. He was almost like a young talent that Renault grabbed and was almost like investing in a young driver that they hoped would come good. And Cyril just hasn't quite delivered on what Renault wanted from them. Brivio is a little bit more of an experienced Wiley Fox, and he would have dealt with big characters before. I mean, they don't come much bigger than Fernando Alonso, and he has that. But I think he will be savvy to that and have the right people around him to fill in the gaps on his F1 knowledge, and he'll be a man manager, I would imagine, a lot more, much like Toto Wolff is essentially on that front.
It's an interesting one because Renault Alpine seem to have gone about for broke about like sweeping the board, because they also got rid of one of them guys. They've got Laurent Rossi, who's a new CEO for Alpine, and he doesn't have any F1 experience either. I mean, he spent 9 years in the early 2000s working for Renault, but that was on the commercial side, not in the motorsport side. They just got rid of the guy in charge of Renault Sport as well. So it is going to be interesting to see how they adapt, how they come together, whether it's a fully cohesive unit, I think, there. But it's another interesting side story in the adventure, which is Formula One, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Renault. Renault seems to be this team. I know, obviously, Alpine is now the new name of the team.
Yeah.
I have always been that team over the years. I don't know if it's maybe because of Crashgate comes in and makes them unpopular, but they've never really had like a deep-rooted fan base. Would you
I think
say
it comes, yeah, some of it comes down to, I think, is too many name changes.
Mm,
Because, they were Tolman when I first started watching the sport. They've been through Tolman, Benetton, Renault, Benetton again, I think, is it?
no, it was
Definitely
Lotus.
Renault again. Then they've been Lotus. Then they were Renault. You lose
Yeah.
track almost because it's like the same team has been five different teams.
Mm,
And it's very difficult to get like a set, stable fan base going throughout that time. I mean, the thing with, say, Racing Point is, okay, people didn't warm to the Racing Point thing, but there's certain gimmick things like the social media, the pink livery. Force India had a fan base. You could trace a fan base to a certain extent all the way back to Jordan because it had a very strong character. The Midland Spiker thing, not so much, but and now they're becoming Aston Martin, and Aston Martin itself is a huge kind of brand of a huge following. So that has a lot people can support about it, but I mean, I've referred to it as the Enstone outfit for years, just because it does seem to be a little bit lacking in an identity.
yeah, it's easier to go the Enstone team than it is to necessarily associate it with one branch or the other. But through that lack of a strong following support, obviously, I'm not saying that they have no fans. Clearly, they have fans, and
Yeah.
you see they have support out there. But compare it to maybe other aspiring or top teams like a McLaren. Well, now Aston Martin will go from there. But Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, these teams back in to go without saying. Even Williams, tracking back to the glory days of Sunnit. And by that, I feel like a lot of people, because they don't necessarily have that strong base, are underestimating some of the things that they're actually quite doing and the position that they're in. If those pieces, yes, there are quite a few moving pieces and kind of new pieces in the mold, but if those pieces work, then boy, do Renault really have an exciting whole team package
Well,
going.
it's that thing going into the new regulations with the cost cap and stuff. You've got three teams in the form of Renault, Aston Martin, McLaren, who are all perfectly positioned almost to maximize that because
Mm,
they're not. Whereas with Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull, they're having to trim the fat, cut down, try and learn to perhaps be more efficient. In the case of certainly Ferrari, whereas in Renault, Renault came into the sport thinking we're going to spend less than Mercedes and we're going to race them, we're going to catch them, and we'll win a championship while spending less than them, forgetting how much they would have to invest in infrastructure and various other things to start with. So it's like, how can you start behind someone and catch up with them by spending less? That just seemed like completely a very strange philosophy to me. But with the cost cap, now they actually can play on a playing field with them. So
mm.
they could very well take advantage of that if they can get their house in order in terms of organisation.
Yeah, I think the first couple of years, definitely when they took over the Lotus brand in 2016-17, I mean, Renault always have probably come out like going, "Oh, we're going to be challenging for podiums this year," and stuff like that. They've always oversold and not necessarily delivered on those promises going forward through a season. But I do think, especially in the past couple of seasons, they have eaten a bit of humble pie and reconsolidated and quietly been making key additions behind the scenes, having change up to staff. through the transition of kind of 2018-19 into 2020, that you go, okay, well, now this is a team that you have to take seriously, because they're acting like a big team, in my view. They're making changes, they're buying in key personnel who have good reputations, and we all know good reputations doesn't equal success, but it gives yourself the best possible chance of success by getting in tried and tested people. Then, you know, if Fernando Alonso comes in and he does come back and the car, he works, the team works, then you've got a hell of a driver on your hands that anything's possible with.
Yeah. So, but there's definitely reasons to be optimistic. With the midfield being as close as it is, you can look at Fernando, and depending on just how the car is, he could potentially finish anywhere between about 4th and 11th in the Drivers' Championship. But it's sort of part of the beauty of the midfield is that although we make best guesses, we can't actually be definitely certain. And
The
that's sort of the fun of watching it.
Yeah, the midfield right now is how we kind of wish that Red Bull, well, not Red Bull, but kind of Max Verstappen and the Mercedes team take a holiday for a couple of years.
It's the fight we want to see for the win.
Yeah, exactly. They've got a hell of a championship. If the championship last year was for 4th downwards, we would have had a brilliant year of F1, and we did have brilliant races.
Yeah,
has to be said, but you do have this itching feeling that you want to see a kind of title fight go down to the wire. You want to see it close. You want to see the top guys challenged all the way. And yeah, from 4th downwards, it would have been a hell of a championship fight, and surprise contenders up there. And yeah, I think it would have been between Checo, Ricciardo, and Charles Leclerc. Funnily enough, actually, were the guys up there. So yeah, it's the fight we all want to see, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But unfortunately, we may have to wait a couple more years. There is hope, obviously, when the regulations change, because no one's quite sure about that. Unfortunately, I have a sneaking suspicion that Mercedes are probably going to be at the front again, just because they can afford to actually take a leap on it now, and it probably won't affect them too much, whereas everyone else is still kind of racing.
I think the problem is with that one is that I don't think we have seen a team as good as Mercedes in F1 ever before. So therefore, rules changes have affected other teams, even derailed Ferrari when they were in their furore back in the early 2000s. But Mercedes,
that was just tyres.
Yeah.
Basically, completely off kilter here, but Ferrari's entire thing at the time was like doing short, pacey, speedy stints. So the tyres they'd had were designed for short, maximum attack runs, and the company just didn't manage to develop from that to making a tyre that would last an entire race. And so suddenly they basically couldn't do a race distance like with any real pace. That's going to derail you quite properly.
Exactly.
So we don't really have that kind of lottery thing going on as such with cars and setup and stuff these days.
No, I mean, Bernie literally did do that to say, I've got to stop Ferrari winning. In terms of that, and I think Liberty Media are a little softer in that element, that they won't out and out make it obvious that they're going, we're fed up of Mercedes winning, we are just going to stop you. We're going to give the other teams an opportunity, but if Mercedes still win, then fair play to them. Where Bernie was just like, Ferrari, stop winning.
Yeah, this is getting boring now. How can I sabotage you?
Yeah. Yeah, Bernie down to a T, especially in those latter years.
Yeah, and he's not a man you wanted to cross. Ross Brawn, basically, he's kind of suggested that by coming up with the double diffuser and derailing various plans Bernie had over the course of that season was why Bernie largely basically talked people into sidelining him in Mercedes. Yeah, so he's not someone who forgets people going against him to a certain extent. Very interesting character. That's another video in itself, I think.
I mean, yeah, politics in F1 and being linked to the right people and backstabbing and everything. It's a whole cloaks and daggers world that adds to the fascination of the sport. It certainly there is elements of it in other sports, but nothing quite as big and major scale as F1, and that's probably mainly to do with the amount of money that's involved in the sport, to be fair.
It would likely be so, yes. Right, I'm thinking it's probably a good idea to wrap it up there, just because otherwise me and you haven't actually chatted online or whatever since about June time, so this could go on for a while otherwise.
Yeah,
The last video,
it would be something
video
like the 6-hour review I did with Raz. I think like in 2019 season review, it was like a 6-hour one. I was like, bloody hell. It turns out he didn't press pause. So rounding up sounds a good idea. It turns out.
Yeah, the last time we did a video online was in June time, and it was talking about Gilles Villeneuve.
It was indeed.
Yeah.
The legend that is.
Yeah, a long time ago. Another feisty character. All right. Well, anyway, on that note, thank you very much for taking part in the video. The probability is everyone who is subbed to me is also subbed to you, but just in case they aren't, would you like to talk about either of your channels?
Yeah, well, because one's not enough for us anymore. So we have F1 Fanatics and Indie Fanatics. Basically, F1 Fanatics, both the kind of staples of the channels now. Podcasts every Wednesdays, kind of just chatting about the sports and what's relevant in the recent ones. We have a feature video every week on the IndyCar channel. We're kind of new Indie Fanatics. We don't try to kind of say we're experts on the sport. We're learning, so we kind of education, kind of as we're learning, we put stuff out that we think is useful for people.
Yeah.
Exactly, in terms of that. And F1 through the season, we cover the fancy game, driver ratings. And yeah, that's pretty much. And then do kind of occasional kind of feature videos where we just kind of interview with people and chat F1 on maybe a relevant topic at the time. But make sure you are subscribed to David if you are watching this channel. If you're watching this channel for the first time, definitely deserves more hundreds. Certainly a guy who knows what he's on about and enjoyable to listen. And I always love getting together and chatting with you, David. And like I said, we could chat on for hours and hours, but we probably do need to let people kind of get on and do other things.
It possibly might be an idea. We'll snowball and save ideas for another time, maybe. Right. Well, anyway, take care. I shall let you get off. And to the people watching at home, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and bye-bye. And that's it. Some sort of intro to it, and then we'll go into talking, and then we'll work it out from there, pretty much. It's like I had a plan, but I've just been thrown out completely by technical issues now, you know?
Just like, we've set on the recording, we'll see where we end up.
Pretty much. And
Sounds
it's like, and in 3, 2, 1...